We know that most of the job training that happens in the private sector, and it's offered by companies. But we haven't been able to track very effectively the impact of this. And one thing we know for sure is that employers tend to underinvest in training for a number of reasons, including the fact that they are sometimes afraid that the people that they train, they might go to another place. So in any event, we know that programs that subsidize, that are public, that subsidize the training are effective. And there's been some evidence from surveys of employers and so forth that they might. However, this kind of research has not been conducted in more than 2 decades. So my colleague Annelies Goger and I were interested in learning if that still works in the current environment. And that's because, in large part, labor markets today do not look like labor markets 20 years ago or more. So there is interest in finding out if these kinds of programs still work. We conducted a mixed methods evaluation of a state program to better understand the value of this type of program and its role in incentivizing workforce training. Our paper that Annelies and I published is based on that research. And just to clarify, Annelies was with SPR then, and now is with the Brookings Institution. So the program we evaluated is called the Employment Training Panel, and it's based in California, and has been around for more than 20 years, actually more than 30 years now. It was started sometime in the 1980s, and it funds employers to provide training for their employees. Upon request, there's a request process, and so our data collection included multiple types of data collection, including interviews with agency staff, intermediaries, labor organizations, and employers. We also conducted a survey of employers that were served by the ETP, and we asked them about their training practices, the skill needs that they have, and partnerships they developed. And then finally, we conducted a quasi-experimental study to understand the effects of the program on a number of company outcomes, including revenues and employment levels. So interview participants, when we interviewed participants, they reported many benefits to participating in ETP programs or the ETP program. And so among these benefits that they listed were that it helped them retain and motivate the workforce, that it helped them upgrade or set up human resources systems and practices that they didn't have before. They reported increased technical knowledge of their workers, improved quality control processes. And what struck us was that small and medium companies were much more likely to report these kinds of outcomes compared to other kinds of companies. We also found that there was a difference in the kind of training that was reported by employers based on employer size. So we found that large employers tended to report offering more often training to their employees compared to small and medium companies. And so that was sort of a proof that, or offered some background to our understanding of why the small and medium companies seemed to benefit more from ETP training, is because they tend to offer it internally to a lesser degree than larger companies. For the quasi-experimental study, what we did is we compared the outcomes of a sample of ETP-funded companies with the outcomes of a very similar group of companies that were not funded by ETP. And what we found was that on average, ETP-funded companies had more employees and higher revenues compared to the comparison group of non-ETP companies, which suggests that ETP training may have improved labor productivity, and competitiveness through the training that it offered. We also found that the impacts differed pretty significantly by employer size. We found that companies, that the impact of the program on companies of medium, that were small and medium, so between about 20 to about 100, were very large and significant. Effects on micro companies, so companies under 20 employees, were negative, in fact. And the impacts on large companies, so above 100 employees, were small and statistically insignificant. So program overall seemed effective, and based on what I was just saying, it seemed to us that there is a sweet spot of participation or impact of participation, in that very small and very large companies didn't seem to benefit as much, and but that, it seemed to us, that happened for different reasons. So the very small companies were probably not ready to participate in this kind of program, because to them, participating in this kind of program is probably too large a disruption, and their systems are just not well prepared for this kind of intervention. On the other hand, very large companies have a sort of different situation, in that they already offer a lot of training through their own internal resources and other resources as well. So this additional resource is more of something that sort of comes on top of that, rather than something that's substantially impacting their outcomes. So while that's true, this is just an analysis of one program, and we would need to understand similar types of programs in many different contexts to be able to then generalize and see what works for which kinds of companies. So we are suggesting a research program that would look into similar programs across the country, to be able to understand a lot better what designs are working in for which kinds of companies. Generally, the potential is there. It's just a matter of delving deeper into it. And we also suggest or recommend much better access to data, because some of the data that were needed for the study were not quite there in terms of quality. And so, for example, company revenues would be extremely impactful to have them from IRS, for example. But we didn't have that data source available. So we had a different data source, which was satisfactory. But this research program would entail government agencies at federal and state levels cooperating and generating these kinds of data access, so we can, as researchers, understand what works.